Chapter 15, Jesus is preaching to the people using parables. He uses characters who represent God and some of his followers. In this story, one son asks for his share of his father's money and leaves for a distant country, abandoning his family. He falls on some hard times and loses everything his father gave him, and he becomes so poor that he has to sleep with pigs and beg for their food. The son realizes he has made a big mistake, and he decides that he's going to return home and ask his father to become his servant to repay him. Before he even gets home, his father runs out the door and hugs him. The son says he realizes he did the wrong thing, but the father decides to give him nice clothes, rings, and throw a feast, which is even more of his own possessions. The son's older brother, who is out in the fields, hears all the noise from the feast and decides to ask what's going on. When he hears about the feast, he is upset that he was loyal the whole time and he never got a feast. The father says that the feast isn't because the son was doing the right thing the whole time. It's because he went down a wrong path, but he realized that he was wrong. He was lost, but he had returned. He was dead, but he is alive again. In the beginning of the story, the son asks for his father's money. This was unusual at the time because usually the father would wait until he had died and he would split it between his sons or give it to the oldest. This shows that the son has fully separated from his father and is abandoning him. Later in the story, the son runs out of money and is forced to eat with pigs and stay with them. Pigs were unclean in Jewish law, so it shows that he is fully separated from God. The son returns home and apologizes to his father. He says he doesn't deserve to be called his son and is about to ask his father if he can work for him to repay him. But the father doesn't even let him say that. He forgives him before the son can even get that out. This shows the father's generosity because he's not making the son work to repay him for what he did. At the end of the story, the older son asks what's going on, and hears from his father that the younger son is getting a feast. He's upset because he was doing the right thing the whole time, which would usually have been more celebrated. The story of the lost son shares a lot of similarities with the Old Testament stories about sin. The story of Adam and Eve. In the beginning, they're with God before sinning. In Adam and Eve, it's eating the fruit, while in the lost son, it's leaving home with his father's money. The sin leaves them separated from God, others, and themselves. In the parable, the son realizes his mistake and seeks forgiveness for his sin, while in Adam and Eve, because they still turned away from God, they are banished from the garden. The story of the Israelites. The parable of the lost son follows the same theme as the first half of the sin cycle. The stories both begin with sin, which is either idolatry or abandoning God. The sinners are left in a really bad place because of their sin. In the Israelites' story, they're captured, while in the lost son, the son ends up broke and all by himself. They seek forgiveness from God when they're captured or at their lowest point. In the judges' stories, God sends a judge to redeem them, while in the story of the lost son, the son receives his father's forgiveness and is welcomed back. Both stories end with the sinner becoming happy because they realized what was wrong, and they were rewarded. The main theme of the parable of the lost son is about the effects of sin and our relationship with God. At the beginning of the story, the son asks for his father's money, and the father agrees out of love. He knows what will happen when he lets the son leave, but he does it anyway so the son can be happy. God does this with us whenever we sin, because he knows that it will make us happy at the time, and he knows that we can learn from it. The son leaves and loses all his money. The son's sin has left him at the lowest point in his life. Like in Adam and Eve, he's separated from God, himself, and his family, and he realizes that he is not happy. He realizes sin will not leave him happy, and he decides that he's going to return to God. The son returns home, and the father throws a party. The father's happiness to see his son represents God's happiness when we go down the wrong path in our life, but realize that we were wrong. He doesn't have to let us repay him. He just has to hear that we are sorry and we know our mistake. The father has a feast to celebrate the son's return. The feast is like the reward we'll get in heaven when we return to God. The older son is upset because he was doing the right thing the whole time and he never got a feast. The older son in the story represents the people who always follow God. He's still happy that they're always following him, but he celebrates whenever someone who is lost finds their way back to him when they realize they aren't happy without him. The moral of this parable is that we are always welcomed by God because he always wants us to be with him. This story is one that really applies to a lot of our lives at this time. We're starting to make our own decisions at school and in our personal lives. So we probably have to make the decision for ourselves. Are we going to choose to stay with God? I think this story is good because it teaches the moral of what happens when we choose the wrong thing, but then realize that it's wrong. I think it's really important to us because in this time we are going to choose something that's wrong. So it's good to know that when we do, God's still going to be happy for us when we realize we're wrong and we return to him.